With less than 120 days out from the election, we have a Senate prediction according to the latest polls right now. So, as you all know, we have an election where the presidential level seems to be somewhat settled. Joe Biden may or may not be the nominee, but it's doubtful that any Democrat that steps into this like 1945 Germany scenario will come out the bunker alive. And so it really comes down to down ballot races. Who will control the House? Who will control the Senate? Let's talk about the Senate today. We have a 28 to 38 Senate right now. Insofar as this map's concerning, we have a third of the seats up for re-election, and we're going to deduce some of the more safe elections so that we can kind of save you all time. So these are the promise seats for the Democrats. So right now they're at 39. So it's a very low floor for the Democratic Party going forward. But I will tell you that there are some hanging chads when it comes down to Maryland and Minnesota. There may be some promise for Republicans. So let's get right into the data. So Larry Hogan is a pretty conservative, and by conservative, I mean just a Republican at all in a blue state like Maryland, and he's running for Senate. He used to be the governor for a long time, and so it's pretty evident that he would have the best shot at winning the Senate, but there's two major issues with that situation. Right now, Larry Hogan has a predicament that is very common in this society, where we have a very polarized election. So much like how in all likelihood, a state like West Virginia would not vote for a Democrat no matter how conservative a guy like Joe Manchin may be. This year, on a presidential level, it's just very unlikely that there are people that are going to vote for President Trump and then vote for a Democrat down ballot. And much like that, I think a lot of people who would vote for Biden also would probably not vote for a Republican, even if they're perceived as moderate like Larry Hogan. And so he is down in the polls by about 9 percentage points on average. Now, this has not really been updated in about 2 weeks, but it's also evident that it's probably not likely to change by too much. To overcome a 9-point deficit in the span of a few months is not common at all. And there's no real reason as to why that would ever be the case. You know, the average Republican would probably lose the Senate by 20. Larry might lose it by 10. And so that's impressive in and of itself. But again, that doesn't really matter when whoever wins, no matter if it's only by 1 vote or 1 million, that's who gets in office. While we're at it, we're going to consult with Amy Klobuchar's re-election campaign for, I think, a third or fourth term in the state of Minnesota. We have her, the most recent election at 2018, basically losing no support between the 2016 Hillary Clinton coalition. In fact, she gained a ton. She won by 24% in 2018. That's absolutely remarkable, obviously. So she's an electoral juggernaut. So she won by 24, but let's compare that with the polling nowadays. The polling nowadays shows that she's likely to win against whoever this white guy is by 12.5. This is notable because obviously you would hope that Minnesota would be closer. There's a great chance that Trump does win the state of Minnesota at the federal level, but that then all of a sudden down ballot that Klobuchar will win, and that's actually likely to happen. Klobuchar outperformed Democrats at the federal level anytime that it's even been approached. And so that situation is pretty likely that she does win by over 10 points. For her to win by 12 in an election where she won by like 24 last time, that's still a decent kind of a makeup for the Republicans. And so there is probably maybe a 2% chance that the Republican opponent could beat Klobuchar. There really just isn't really a shot here. And you can tell by the fact that there's not much polling because people aren't really trying. And so now that we have addressed the safe Democratic seats, let's put in some Republican ones. So, for example, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Mississippi, Tennessee, West Virginia, Indiana, Missouri, and also Florida are safe. The 2 Nebraska seats are also safe. But I'm going to be thorough here. Florida is a safe Republican seat. It might not look that way because Scott only has a 6-point lead over Mescal Powell, but you have to understand that the thing will get less tight over time, which is anathema to how elections typically work. But the truth is that there's not really been an investment by the Democratic Party in the state of Florida, whereas Rick Scott is a somewhat self-interested politician with an outsized amount of fundraising capacity due to his position in the Senate seniority. And so Rick Scott is in a prime position, honestly, to put in more money than the Democrat, proportionally speaking, and so we'll have a marketing advantage easily. And so Rick Scott will certainly win the state of Florida for the Senate and will probably win it by about 10 points. Now, for now, it's a 6-point victory nonetheless. So that gives the Republicans 50 seats. If Trump does win the election, which he's all but sure to do, no matter who the president is, as long as there's a Republican in there, the VP will be the tiebreaker. And so just as of right now, the Republicans do control the Senate, but let's get into the other elections. For example, Texas, a lot of Democrats are coping, saying that, it'll be close, but Cruz will still win. Like, I don't think it'll be that close between Cruz and Allred. But that being said, think about it. Beto O'Rourke lost to Ted Cruz by about 3, And that was an election that was super nationalized. There was a ton of press coverage on it that was favorable to the Democratic Party in the state of Texas. You don't really see this. It's being overshadowed easily, this race in Texas is, by the Biden-Trump debacle. That being said, if that's the case, then Cruz will have an easy time to just ride the Trump coattails and win by about 7. That's very easy to see. Now, moving on to a place like New Mexico, though, it's a little more difficult. When it comes to major polling in the state of New Mexico, this is the next state we're going to cover. Of course, we do see that things are not the most favorable for Nila Domenici. I believe that's her name. Nila or whatever. Domenici is not really in a position to win by any means. So the reason why I say this is because clearly, even in the polls that are sponsored by the Republicans at the Senate level, Domenici is still losing to Martin Heinrich by 4. And when you look at a poll that is more, I guess, unbiased, you would see that Heinrich is still winning by 7. Even in the least favorable one for the Democrat, you'll notice that he is still winning by 3, according to this huge Republican-sponsored Red Oak strategic poll with 1,800 registered voters being polled here. And so that really leads anybody with a brain to think that the Republicans don't really stand a chance here. Also contrast that with the fact that Joe Biden is right now leading Donald Trump in the state of New Mexico in most polls. Now, Joe Biden is much less popular than Martin Heinrich. Say what you will about Martin Heinrich, and I doubt you have much to say, as I don't either, but he's definitely not a senile person. And so clearly he's going to do better than Joe. And so even if Trump were to win the state of New Mexico by some damn near miracle, by let's say 1%, it still would not be enough to drag Nila Domenici over the edge. Not because herself is a bad candidate, but just namely because of the fact that the Democrat that she's going against is a half-decent human being, just when it comes to the electoral prospect. And so it's very easy to shoe in New Mexico as a 95% chance of a Democratic victory. So right now you have 42 seats for the Democrats, 51 for the Republicans. We do have one state that still edges out Democrat, in my opinion, which is Virginia. If we look into the state of Virginia, it's looking really hopeless insofar as getting a good pulse as to what's going on here. There is no polling on Real Clear Polling, obviously, as you can see here, but we can reference the results over the past several years. 2012, Tim Kaine, who's the incumbent Democrat, won by about 6 percentage points over Allen. Whereas we have 2018, obviously the race after that one, where Kaine wins by 16. Referencing that with FiveThirtyEight polling, which is an aggregator overall, this is the next step of searching. If you look here, you'll notice that we only really have 3 polls. If you look as far as September, we have Glenn Youngkin as the guy going against Kaine, in which case it's a close race and still an L, but obviously Youngkin isn't running. But we have Hung Kao as the Republican opponent as of 4 months ago. This polling happened, and it was a small poll, and it had Kaine losing no support. Basically, he did beat Kao, the Republican, by 12. And so it's a very hard thing to ask, what's going on here. So here's the thing about Hung Kao. Hung Kao seems like a decent enough opponent for Tim Kaine, but the problem is that Tim Kaine is just a decent enough politician. He's not senile, and so he would have to really poop the bed to really give a victory to the Republican opponent. What I mean is that Donald Trump is poised to tie/barely win the state of Virginia against dementia Joe Biden. And so when it comes down to a Republican down ballot to do the same, you would have to have the name Glenn Youngkin or basically not win at all. And so that's just basically the truth. At a nationalized level, this is not really a thing that gets covered much. The Virginia Senate is just not really a procurement of the national eye. And so there's no reason why there would be like this blitz of money for Hung Kao to somehow swarm Tim Kaine, who's a fixture of the Clinton circle. And so I think that Tim Kaine will have adequate funding and will have enough of the old Biden support from 2020 and even his support where he won by 16 10 years ago and kind of show himself to be a opponent that will win. And so basically what I predict is that Tim Kaine will win the Senate by like 3 or 4. Even if Donald Trump were to win the state slightly, it still doesn't matter. I think that it would still have enough ticket splitting, which ticket splitting, by the way, if you guys don't understand, is when you have somebody who, let's say, votes for a Republican for president, but then wants a check on that person and then says, I want this Democrat at the bottom. And that happens sometimes. And, when we're dealing with elections where there's millions of people, tens of thousands of them switching up and keeping it a little mixed actually does distort the election down ballot. So that's why we're covering. So as we see, the Republicans have 51 seats, which makes them basically impervious to, even if Biden were to win, they would still retain the majority. But obviously, there are some Republicans that are not MAGA. And so when it comes down to it, maybe 51 is not cutting it. So let's look into these other states as well. Pennsylvania is my prediction as to who is basically the best odds for a Democrat retaining a seat would be the state of Pennsylvania. As you guys can see, Bob Casey Jr. is winning Pennsylvania by 5.1 in the aggregate polls. As you guys can see also, there hasn't been a poll since the debate though, or only a day after. And so let's look into it for a couple different clues. So as you guys can see, we can have a real assertion as to what the macro results are of these elections. So for example, in 2012, Bob Casey won by 9. In 2018, he won by 13. So these are strong results for a guy in a swing state like Pennsylvania. Even in the Trump era, he still won by 13. So it shows that there were plenty of people in 2016 who voted for Trump and ended up voting for Bob Casey. So he has an appeal as a pseudo-moderate, as a Catholic, I believe, and that kind of has a fixture in that Rust Belt kind of Pennsylvanian attitude. And so keep that in mind. Now, we look at all the polling going back as far as months ago. As early as March 27, y'all can see even October of last year, Bob Casey's winning every single poll. Every single poll Bob Casey's winning in. Now, things are obviously changing. Democrats are faced with an election where the Democratic nominee is super unpopular. So while Casey's winning by 5, you'll notice that President Biden is at a negative 18.4 approval rating. So it's a very difficult thing for him to perhaps kind of sell himself as, again, Bob Casey will say, well, I support President Biden as the nominee. And then the Republican can say, well, what the hell is wrong with you? Hey, people of Pennsylvania, you're clearly probably going to vote for Trump over Biden. Why won't you vote for me? Now, the opponent, Bob McCormick, is not really a palatable candidate. He's basically a diet Mitt Romney when it comes to appeal, like a rich carpetbagger elite white dude. This does not really sell in Pennsylvania, but okay, you're stuck with the guy, fine. But the issue comes with other polling, and we're going to pull this up right now. As you guys can see, the most recent poll has McCormick losing to Bob Casey by 4 percentage points, even in light of that debate. Which shows that Casey is likely to win because, again, that debate was definitely a low point for Joe. Yeah, he will gradually lose support, but that was definitely a turning point right there, eh? And so that's notable. You see the polls prior to the debate, and McCormick is losing to Casey by like 8, 7, 6, 6. And yeah, the debate lowered the Democrat support for the Senate nominee in Casey by maybe 2 or 3 percentage points, but that's not cutting it. And so we're looking at a scenario which, yeah, of course, Joe Biden is doing horrible, but Bob Casey is much better. And so I think that people will say that, you know what, Trump can win the state of Pennsylvania by, let's say, 5, and then Casey can win it by maybe 2, and that could be completely feasible. A lot of people's problems are not with the Democrats because they're crazy on healthcare, because they're crazy on taxes, on a myriad of different issues. They don't like the Democrats mainly because of Joe Biden just being a horrible surrogate for them. And if that's the case, then that is a big issue. So with that said, I'm pretty confident that the Democrats will win the state of Pennsylvania at the state level. Again, it's not to say that the Republican is really in a position to win either. It's just a question of you were not really there at the right time. And so that's just that clear. Now, we will look into some other elections. I think Ohio, or it really is a struggle to think of who is the best odds for the Democrats to win, with. And so let's see what state it would be. I think the least likely Republican to win at this point might be Hovde, or it could be Kari Lake. I'm not sure. And so we're going to look into the results. So right now, Eric Hovde is polling worse than Kari Lake. In fact, Baldwin is carrying the polls by 7.4 percentage points on the RCP aggregate. And if you look into the polling overall, you'll see that Baldwin has been carrying all of these several polls. So that's not a good look. Now let's gleam into the past 2 elections. 2012, oh my God, unprofessional, but hey, Baldwin basically, she won by 5.5% in 2012. 2018, she won by 10.4 or 10.8 with 55.4% of the vote against Laura Vuckmer. Now, keep in mind, these candidates were not the best that went against her, and these were off-year elections. In the case of 2018, 2012, when it came to Obama, she didn't do any better than Obama did. In fact, looking into it, you'll notice that Obama won Wisconsin by 7 percentage points, whereas, again, he overperformed what's her name? Tammy Baldwin, or whatever her name is. Basically, she underperformed. This is important for a couple of different reasons, guys. The reason being is that if she underperforms Obama, it shows that she's not really a good politician and that she might actually underperform the standard that people have her up to. Now, she will do better than Biden. In fact, I think virtually every candidate at the national level will do better than Biden. And I would freaking hope so, because the guy can't even string a sentence together. So if you're worse than Joe, then what does that say about you? And I would not like to see them in a retirement home because they'd be even worse then. Anyhow, so Hovde, from what I can glean, is a pretty congenial, if that's a word, decent, photogenic. He is not really the problem. It's just that he's not really well known in my estimation. The race isn't also nationalized. And when you're down in a race, you would want it to be nationalized so that you can get more outside funding from outside the state to kind of buoy you up with ads. And so that is something that you would like to see from Hovde. That is yet to happen. And so the trajectory doesn't look great. If we look into the polling post-debate, it doesn't really exist. And so that's something that's severely lacking because, again, the polling is super indicative of where the race is going to go. So let's quickly check into 538 and see if they say anything else. As we can see, we have, as of the last month, we have Hovde losing by 3, Baldwin winning by 5, 5, 5, and 12. So just to reference the ones that are in line with each other, it seems like, yes, Hovde is losing by 5 to Baldwin, but we have to keep in mind that these are prior to the debate. This poll on the top doesn't really seem to be on point with anything really. It seems off, so we're going to disregard it. But when it comes out to these ones, though, June 20th, I believe these are somewhat accurate. Okay, so think about it. Joe Biden lost about 2 to 3 percentage points in the polls overall after that debate. And so maybe you could extrapolate that to mean that Baldwin also lost a couple points of respect with the voters to Hovde implicitly due to that debate as well. Though we don't have polls yet, I think that's a basic inference. And so while right now she's poised to win by 5, I think she'd probably win by like 1 or 2 given that debate performance. But polls in the oncoming weeks will kind of elucidate that notion. And so now the Democrats are at 45 Senate seats. But let's move on to Arizona. So Arizona is interesting for a couple different reasons. Again, Trump is poised to win the state of Arizona by upwards of 5 to 8 percentage points, which is a remarkable feat, better than in 2016, in fact. But we do have Kari Lake underperforming the president by any means, and so that's a pretty bad look. Now, granted, there is room to maneuver here. As you guys can see, Gallego, who is a progressive, he's kind of between, let's say, he's like an Elizabeth Warren politically, and so that's a notable thing. Now, granted, we look into the polling. Gallego obviously has a 5.3% lead in the polls. That's not really something that you can triumph over unless things really do change. Now, these do not really involve the debate performance from Joe Biden. Again, that will be a windfall for any down ballot Republican and a disaster oncoming like a thunderstorm for any Democrat that's in office or trying to get into it. Now, let's look into this. Every single poll that I can look up right here shows that Gallego's up. And so it's definitely his to lose at that point. That being said, there are things that will come that will definitely hurt the Democrats. As someone who's desperate to see what the debate will do to change the results, there is no polling in the state of Arizona as of right now of note that is after the debate. And so right now we're just working off of a polling average that shows that Gallego's probably winning by like about 5. So basically the same thing as Wisconsin, which is too bad. And so Kari Lake as of right now is losing. But again, this is not accounting for the debate. That's definitely going to help Kari. It's just a question of how many people will see her as a package deal with Donald Trump versus just saying like, okay, well, maybe you're crazy, but Donald's okay, which is a hard thing to sell because I've met Kari and she's pretty much like as MAGA as it can get. And so if you're voting Trump at that point, then you would definitely vote Kari. But there's another thing that might complicate things. And this factor is ostensibly as it goes. People would have, let's say Biden were not senile, Trump would probably still win Arizona by, let's say, 1 or 2 percentage points. And then Kari would have been down 1 or 2. But because Trump is at 7, a lot of Kari people might say, well, then wouldn't Kari be like at 4 or 5? But the truth is that the people that Trump is winning over right now to buoy his like slight victory in Arizona to like a very solid one, that 5 percentage vote shift is due to the debate. And those are basically disaffected independents. They're not MAGA people that he's like bringing in. All those MAGA people are already on the plantation. And so to really just kind of explain it to people in Arizona, it's to say that Trump is winning over the collapsing Biden voters, but it's not like Gallego is senile, and so that's not the same, kind of reciprocal action. And so that explains why Kari Lake is not gaining yet. But we'll see in the coming weeks. Obviously, I want her to win. The primary's coming up against Sheriff Lamb, I believe, from Pinal County. And so we're going to see how that turns out. But as of right now, it seems pretty dire in the state of Arizona for Senate Republicans overall. Looking into the neighbor state of Nevada, you'll notice that the polling is not the best. Obviously, we only have a couple ever since the primary kind of settled. So Sam Brown is the presumptive nominee, obviously, against Jackie Rosen. Now, Jackie Rosen is a pretty mainline Democrat. That's the perception, at least. I haven't looked into it, as haven't most of the people that you would ask. But anyway, the point being is that, obviously, Jackie Rosen in these 3 polls is leading by 5, 12, and 8. Now, granted, there's only one poll after the debate performance by Joe Biden, and it shows Rosen with 41, Brown at 33, so up 8 for the Democrat. Now, this is somewhat complicated because obviously 41 to 33 is only 74% of the vote. That leaves you with about 25% undecided. Obviously, in this election, the undecideds will largely, and by maybe 2/3 majority, break for the Republicans, as obviously, why the hell would they be undecided and then go to Democrats? Because these undecideds are people that used to be Democrats that are now on the fence, and so they're shifting in a certain way. So if you're falling a certain way, you're likely to, with gravity, go Republican rather than to somehow, by some miracle of, wizardry, to go back to the Democrat position. And so that's why likely Brown will close the lead. Trump is up in Nevada by a good amount. And so the question would be at that point, why wouldn't you vote for Sam Brown if you're voting for Trump? And so that's why I have a pretty controversial opinion. According to the polls right now, Nevada is going blue, but I will be honest with you guys. I do think it will go red because, again, Sam Brown does not really have any issues aside from the lack of a face that would actually prevent him from winning the Senate. Jackie Rosen also doesn't have any bona fides that would make it kind of clear to a voter that she's a lot better than Biden. In fact, it would just come off as if like, okay, well, maybe you're not dementia riddled, but you're also a crappy person to consult on with the economy or immigration or whatever have you. And Donald Trump was already winning the state of Nevada in the polling prior to the debate. And so that being said, it was already kind of 50-50 if it would have been enough for Trump to win by 2 and then have Sam Brown win by like a point, in Nevada. But now that Trump's winning by like 5 or so, I don't see why Sam Brown wouldn't benefit from that windfall. Again, Kari Lake is a little different because Kari Lake is already kind of like more radical, at least by the perception of people. And so it becomes a little more complicated whether or not she would benefit from the coattails enough to win in the state of Arizona. Nevada is a little different. Nevada was already more poised to be Republican, whether or not there was this huge collapse in the Biden support. So that's why I would say that Sam Brown has a 15% better chance of winning over Kari Lake. Just using logic. But for now, latest polls say that obviously it will go blue. We have 2 more states here, though. I'm going to cover the state of Ohio. So Ohio is a little complicated because obviously it's a state that went to Trump by a lot, both elections. Even when he lost in 2020, again, he still performed very admirably in the state of Ohio. That being said, Sam Brown, who, by the way, tries to market himself as kind of like a populist, pro-tariff, like a Bernie Sanders, but not as old or as like senile, I guess. So Sam Brown is trying to kind of market himself in a more palatable, like blue collar version of Bernie Sanders. I think that's a bunch of baloney in a large extent, but Sam Brown seems to kind of have that reputation, and he electorally is very potent in the state of Ohio. Now, granted, in 2018, he ran against a Republican that was pretty not very impressive in my opinion. And so, with that being said, Sam Brown is totally in position to maybe make it close. And by Sam Brown, I said his name incorrectly, actually. It was Sherrod Brown. Sherrod. Okay, whoops. Anyway, it's a weird name. So Sherrod Brown is up by 5 over Bernie Moreno. Bernie Moreno is an inoffensive, I think he's like a half Colombian or something. So he's nothing to me. I'm Mexican, but still, I think it kind of helps a little bit. I don't know. But either way, Moreno isn't really the worst. Is he very popular? Is he like this maverick sort of like Beto, kind of like, oh, wow, look at this new crop of people coming up. But he's all right. And so there's no real reason why somebody would vote for Trump and then not vote for Moreno. But there will be some, obviously, because obviously the polls aren't all fake. In fact, Brown is winning in all of these polls, but it's unlikely to work out in his favor this time. A couple of different reasons. So firstly, let's look at 2012. Brown won by 6 over Mandel. Mandel sucks as a candidate. He's a complete used car salesman and a bad one, like an autistic one. And then when you look at 2018, Jim Renacci, I think it was his name. Again, not really a notable person, but Brown won by 6. Now, this is somewhat complicated, okay, for a couple of different reasons. Keep in mind that in 2012, Obama won Ohio by 3 percentage points. Why is this vital? Well, obviously, Sherrod Brown, to be fair, did outdo Obama by 3 points, but also keep in mind that Mandel was a horrible candidate at the time. And so he basically ran in line with Obama when you factor that all into the calculus. And so he's not really this electoral juggernaut that you would think. I think he gets the bona fides, though, from, now that I'm looking at it, I'm changing my mind. You look into 2018. 2018 is special because 2018 had a popular vote shift of Democratic plus 8 or 9. And so when you subtract that and you make it a neutral election, it makes it so that Brown actually loses to the Republican by 1. I think Bernie Moreno is a better nominee than Mandel, better than Renacci, and also Trump is on the ballot. Trump is likely to win Ohio by anywhere from like 10 to 13 percentage points. If that's the case, then you would need about a quarter of Trump voters to vote for Sherrod Brown. That doesn't really make sense. In fact, Donald Trump would definitely not let that happen. Donald Trump has a selfish interest, as do I, for a Republican to be the nominee and to win Ohio. And so he will stump for, obviously, the Sherrod Brown people to be quelled and to say, like, you know what, Bernie Moreno is my guy. Latch onto my coattails. There doesn't seem to be a reason as to why Brown will win this election. The polls say different, but my logic is also telling me to go a different way. Right now, the latest polls say that Brown is winning, but just keep in mind that obviously it just doesn't make sense. Now, the last state we want to talk about is Michigan. Michigan is a complicated affair too. As you can see, Michigan is going Democrat for Slotkin over Rogers, but there are some complications. As you can see here, the polling is inadequate. They have a breadth of spread of beginning 6 months ago in January 2nd all the way to June 18th. And so it's an inadequate sample size. Even as of a month ago, Slotkin is up by 2.2. You might think that's oh, well, okay, it's going Democrat, but that's not really true at all. You can see that this poll is so inadequate, this aggregate. It has Slotkin at 39, Rogers at 37, but obviously that doesn't add up to even 90% of the total vote. That leaves a ton of undecideds, which will break Republican. Now, keep in mind this. When it comes down to it, we need to look at other polls. Okay, so the most recent cutting edge poll we could ever find was even before the debate, by the way, where Slotkin is winning by 2. Now, this is not really promising because, like I said, Joe Biden cost the national sway of about 3 to 6 percentage points when it came to that horrible debate performance. And so, a 2-point advantage pre-debate is actually a Rogers W when it comes down to it. Also, keep in mind that this most recent poll has a 44 plus 42 polling amount, so that would add up to 86. 86 obviously leaves 14% undecided. Undecideds will break Republican, so that would be a net like 2 or 3 points for the Republican, presumably, in which case then easily, if Trump wins the state of Michigan by let's say 3 to 5 percentage points, then I see Mike Rogers winning it by a couple points less, and so that would be a W for him. Alyssa Slotkin doesn't really have anything going for her that is gonna do her any good, just basically. And Mike Rogers is very inoffensive, and that's actually what you need in the state of Michigan. And so right now I have a 52 Republican seat majority, 48 Democrat. Again, I disagree with Ohio voraciously, and I think there's an outside chance, obviously, of Arizona, Nevada, and Wisconsin going red. But I'm kind of blending in my opinion with whatever the latest polls say. And obviously the polling hasn't caught up yet because a lot of the focus is with the federal elections, and so they're not really polling the Senate right now. But coming soon in the next 2 weeks, I predict that will change pretty quickly. And so I hope you liked the video. And by I hope you liked, I mean I literally want you to like the video for my sake. Comment down below any suggestions you have, any ideas. I am your puppet. You control me. Psych, I'm not Joe Biden. See y'all on the next one. Adios.